Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Running low on weapons and suffering under economic sanctions, Russia is isolated and apparently desperate. Now it looks like the Kremlin is turning to another rogue nation for help, North Korea.
Reports of an upcoming summit between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un has U.S. officials on alert. They're concerned Kim will sell weapons to Putin in exchange for sophisticated military and nuclear technology. George Thomas has the details.
The last high-level meeting of this kind happened in April 2019, when North Korea's leader, who very rarely ventures outside his country, took an armored train from Pyongyang to visit Putin in the eastern Russian city of Vladivostok. Experts say the reclusive Kim Jong-un will likely take the same route later this month.
I think that it comes at the time when Russia is increasingly globally isolated.
According to new U.S. intelligence, a sanction-strapped Moscow is seeking to buy artillery shells, anti-tank missiles, and rockets from Pyongyang to replenish its stockpile diminished in its war against Ukraine.
Russia is negotiating potential deals for significant quantities and multiple types of munitions from the DPRK to be used against Ukraine.
There's talk that both countries might even hold joint war games.
I think it says a lot that Russia is having to turn to a country like North Korea to seek to bolster its defense capacity in a war that it expected would be over in a week.
Former U.S. Army General and CIA Director David Petraeus warns the West needs to up its economic pressure against the Kremlin.
Russia is obviously desperate for replacement munitions, replacement weapons systems, even microchips and everything else. And as a general comment, we are and should even be doing more to make sure that the export controls and various sanctions that have been imposed are enforced.
News of a potential meeting with Kim follows leaked documents released last month that reportedly show Putin reaching out to the Iranians as well to help Russia build more than 6,000 attack drones for its ongoing war.
There is no other way to look at that than desperation and weakness.
For his part, Kim Jong-un wants a number of items in return, including sophisticated military hardware with technology that could potentially advance North Korea's ballistic and nuclear program.
North Koreans are looking for economic support, fuel, food, sources of cash, anything that can help to keep the regime afloat, and Russia seems to be ready to provide that, even through violation of the UN sanctions.
In July, Kim Jong-un opened his country to foreign visitors for the first time since the COVID pandemic and welcomed Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu as his first guest. They attended an arms exhibition in Pyongyang, which included a prominent display of North Korea's latest Hwasong intercontinental ballistic missile.
Our information further indicates that following Shoigu's visit, another group of Russian officials traveled to the DPRK for follow-up discussions about potential arms deals between the DPRK and Russia.
Putin and Kim have since then reportedly exchanged letters pledging to increase their bilateral cooperation. George Thomas, CBN News.
Well, relations between North Korea and Russia aren't a new thing. When you look at the boulevards of Pyongyang, those are clearly it's Russian architecture that went into it. Russia was an ally with them back in the 1950s. There was a lot of trade, a lot of agreements. But what was missing was let's trade arms. It used to be Russia would help North Korea. North Korea now has probably more artillery shells than any other country on the planet. What they lack is ballistic missile technology. If they were to acquire that from Russia, their nuclear weapons could now threaten the United States. That's a game changer in the Pacific. That's a game changer on world politics. I hope the Kremlin is not that desperate. If they do, it changes the world scene. In other news, more than 80 million Americans are under heat alerts. It's the hottest stretch parts of the East Coast have seen all summer. John Jessup has more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. The World Meteorological Organization is calling the summer the hottest on record, leading some to urge President Biden to declare a climate emergency. While, as Dale Hurd reports, others argue history shows that there were far worse weather events long ago.
This has been a summer of extreme heat weather coverage.
We begin with the extreme heat. That extreme heat, relentless heat wave.
To the extreme heat, an unbearable heat wave.
Some say this summer was the hottest on record, while 2/3 of Americans in a PBS Marist poll now say climate change is affecting the weather.
People are starting to realize that there is an effect.
This definitely feels like we're in that point of no return that people have talked about for a long time.
The UN Secretary General has called for immediate action on climate change.
Global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived.
Weather history, however, tells a different story, that the worst weather events, including the hottest year, have all been in the past. The worst hurricane in history, the Great Hurricane of 1780, which killed over 20,000 people in the Caribbean. The worst wildfire in U.S. history, the Peshtigo, Wisconsin fire in 1871, which killed at least 1,500 people and burned over 1 million acres. The worst flood in world history was in 1931, the Yangtze River flood in China, which killed almost 4 million people. The worst flood in U.S. history was in 1889 in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The deadliest tornado in recorded U.S. history was in 1925, the Tri-State Tornado, which struck Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, killing some 700 people. And the hottest year was in 1936.
A heat wave in America, and hundreds of thousands leave New York.
In 1936, 21 states set their all-time temperature records.
The 1930s were extremely hot. 1936 is the hottest year on record in the United States, and probably throughout the Northern Hemisphere.
Some northern cities saw temperatures between 115 and 120 degrees. Many thousands died across the country, and the resulting Dust Bowl forced the migration of 3.5 million climate refugees out of the Great Plains and Midwest. Weather Bell chief forecaster Joe Bistardi and other experts blamed this summer's sweltering temperatures on a huge amount of water vapor created by an intense underwater volcanic eruption in Tonga last year, and also by warming oceans.
Yeah, there's been an increase in what we call geothermal spreading since the early 1990s. And what it does is it develops a cumulative buildup of heat in the oceans, which then has to be released through the El Niños, which then puts all sorts of water vapor in the air, which then leads to the warming that you're seeing. It's all water vapor.
There have also been record cold temperatures this summer. But that weather news is ignored. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis reminded reporters that while Hurricane Idalia was very damaging, it paled in comparison to the Category 5 Labor Day storm of 1935. With peak winds of 200 miles per hour, it killed more than 400 people.
There were people that got caught up in the storm. Their clothes got ripped off their bodies. The wind was so strong. So I think that the notion that somehow hurricanes are something new, that's just false. And we've got to stop politicizing the weather and stop politicizing natural disasters.
You know, it's a very complicated issue that the alarmists just want to boil down to, fossil fuel use is destroying the planet. The whole climate is a lot more complicated.
Summers in the U.S. are supposed to be hot, something even the Babylon Bee noticed. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thank you, Dale. Well, an update on a story CBN News brought you earlier this week. Joe Kennedy, known as the Praying Coach, has resigned his position as assistant football coach at Bremerton High School in Washington State. Just days ago, Coach Kennedy returned to the football field after an 8-year court battle over his practice of praying on the 50-yard line after games. CBN's David Brody was there to capture the moment when he once again knelt down and gave thanks to God. However, the coach told David that the school district and the lawsuit have taken a lot of the joy out of coaching, leaving him to feel much like an outsider.
As much as they have accepted me, still I feel like I'm kind of the outsider and still on, kind of like on enemy grounds, and I don't like that feeling.
Coach Kennedy also cited personal reasons for his decision to resign, including caring for an ailing family member who lives out of state. Gordon, back to you.
Well, it's a shame that he's had to resign, and 8 years in high school football is forever. That's 2 full 4-year terms, and to try to step back in and still feel that somehow you're an outsider or that you're an enemy of the school, all of those things. My heart goes out to Coach Kennedy and to anyone who's on the front lines of preserving our religious liberty. But let his life stand as an example for us all. We have a right to pray in America. That includes a right to pray at work, regardless of whether you're working for a school district or a government entity. As a private citizen, as a citizen of the United States, you have that right to pray wherever you are. And let's always honor him for an 8-year battle to make sure we all know that and can preserve our rights.